Hi guys, welcome.
Hey everybody.
It's Elena here, and today we've got Dolphin Kasper. Great pleasure to have you here.
Sweet to be here.
And I met Dolphin, through workshops many moons ago. I remember dancing blindfolded or dancing in a completely free space in the fall. It was one of our welcome events. I remember sitting with you, processing people at a festival, with many sort of moments of touching base. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. Really excited to get to share about human potential and about what's possible for humans in terms of life. And you have a really unique background in terms of personal growth coaching for humans, as well as sort of high performance athlete sports stuff, as well as talking about what it takes to get somebody off the street and move into a better form of life. So we're going to touch on all of those, talking about what we're capable of and what it's like to be fully living as a human being. So I'm super excited to have Dolphin here today, and excited to have you guys here if you're here live or on the replay. It's awesome. And yeah, let's dive in.
I'm ready.
You're ready. Are you sure?
Well, we'll find out.
Okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Dolphin, and this is from his website, which we'll link to in the comments. It's so you've been doing this work since 1999, which is kind of mind-boggling. I know a lot of people who have been doing this kind of work since, 2010, 2011, 2012. That's when a lot of us started into this journey. But you've been doing this for a whole decade before a lot of people jumped into it.
I kind of fell into it, and maybe we'll have time later in the session to talk about kind of the fortuitous happenings that led me to doing this kind of work, because it wasn't my trajectory actually.
No.
Before 1999, I wasn't doing anything that would have given you a sense that this would be my career. So yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay. So I'm just gonna share a little bit about your bio, and then we'll jump right into it. So since 1999, you've been doing private coaching, consulting, and facilitation doing thousands of workshops, retreats, and online programs. Dolphin has developed powerful tools in supporting people in becoming empowered authorities in both inner and outer lives. And you have a passion for creating a space in which people can recognize and dissolve their limiting beliefs and coping mechanisms. I'd love to touch base on that coping mechanisms piece. It's huge. And opening the doorway to their full potential, which is such a beautiful thing to do. It's just we have so much capacity. And it says here, you believe in each person's capacity to heal, to grow, and to live a life beyond what they had imagined before. Let's jump in there. Let's start there.
Yeah. I mean, I think on some level we all have this subtle inner sense of the potential of what we are as human beings. We see it in babies as they, with a clean slate and no sense of anything, somehow learn how to move and stand and walk and relate to being an animal, a responsive being in the world. And all of this stuff that seemingly comes out of nowhere is part of our implicit system. So there's an intelligence to this system. And in spite of all the technologies and sort of developments of human society, in some ways we've lost touch with a way of being and a way of living that is about that potential. We get distracted, we get engaged in things that aren't really about us learning and growing. They're more about us creating a warm, fuzzy box to live in.
Yeah.
And so there's no way to do both. You can't live a life that's stretching into your full potential and have a nice, warm, fuzzy box to live in. Those two things are mutually exclusive in most cases. And so my interest is, yes, let's be honest about the difficulties involved in living a life unlimited. And let's be clear about the opportunity that holds, which is significant and beyond what we can imagine, actually. And as people start to recognize what's really possible, we naturally start to feel the meaning of our difficulties. So then the things that has felt like too much, or the things that have felt too hard, or the obstacles that just feel too big for us, we start to see them in context. And then we start to see that, I actually can't. I can't do it all right now, but I can do the next thing. And then life becomes about consistently just doing the next thing. And what seems like small steps becomes, we reach the top of the mountain or the end of the marathon or whatever metaphor you want to use.
No babies sitting there being like, this one fall down is the next step, right? And then when we're little, we don't think about that. We don't think about how that little step impacts the bigger life. We don't think about falling down, being like, oh, well, I'll never climb Everest. It's just
They just
this
keep going.
step and then the next step. And if anybody who's spent time with babies, like they're so persistent. It's like, I don't know how many times each of us had fallen down in order to actually get to walking as adults, right? Each of us have gone through that journey, but sort of forget that journey and then get caught in this box of, oh, I don't know what's possible, or I don't know what could be. Yeah. Can you give me an example of somebody that you've seen really transform, somebody that's gone from like really having a limited experience of life, maybe through the street work that you've done, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's an example that comes to me right away is, especially with social media these days, I've worked with youth since I started, my career as an adult. So around 19 or 20, I started working with youth, and a lot of the work we do, a lot of the things that we do with people that can be empowering, inspirational, transformational, we don't necessarily see the fruits of that. So we're working with someone and they're having their difficulties, and maybe we see some light or we see some benefit to the things that we're doing, but it doesn't look like much. And I've had the opportunity, because of social media, to have some of these youth that I worked with years ago, 15, 18 years ago, reach out to me. And I get some of these messages that are like, hey, I just want to let you know that the time we spent, this might have been like 2002. The time we spent there when I was in grade 9 and I was really struggling meant a lot to me. It really made a difference. And so those are some more general examples. A more specific one is, over the last few years, I've done a lot of work with homeless youth here in Edmonton.
They're in Edmonton.
They're in Edmonton. We're in Calgary now. I'm waking up.
We're on the interweb.
Yeah, totally. They don't know.
Time
In particular, a young woman I worked with was struggling. She was a young parent, had a baby that was maybe a year or 2 old. She was struggling with addiction, in and out of stable living situations. And, she would have 3 or 4 days where she'd kind of clarify and get together and start to make some good choices. And then she'd slip back into these old patterns. And we didn't know. It was one of those things where social services was in and was going to take her child away, and like permanently, and where she was at the crossroads, and these crossroads kept coming, and sometimes she'd take a healthy road, and sometimes she wouldn't. And we were pouring a lot of time and energy and resources into her, and ultimately we got her to a treatment center at a time when she was ready. And I think that's one of the things that for me, talking with anyone who's working with others, there's what you bring to the table and your skill set and your awareness and all the things that you're able to do. And if the person that you're working with isn't ready, it doesn't matter. You could throw all of the best stuff at someone, all the best resources, all the best supports, all the best counselors and mentors. And if they're not ready, it doesn't matter. And so then, not that it's not important that we develop our skills, but our ability to see in someone a readiness and our ability to inspire that readiness is central. So that piece for me was beautiful. And I think in the movies we see something like that, where they tell the tough story and there's the turning point, and then the person's in a great life and the credits roll. It's not like that. It's like you take the turn and then life is hard, but it's hard in a way that's meaningful and hard in a way where the direction you're moving in. And that's what we saw with her, is she made a complete transformation of her life and took real responsibility and was a completely different person. And her life was still hard. It wasn't like all roses and sunshine. So, I really believe in being honest with ourselves, with the people we work with, about the road that we're walking. I think too often we sugarcoat it, and then people get on board. They're like, okay, I'll do it. But we didn't give them the information, and then they stumble. And then they think,
I was never going to stumble. You told me I was never going to stumble. You told me it would be easy and roses, because that's a good chunk of what marketing does, because that's how
you get them in the door.
So that's interesting, because you said inspire the readiness. I want to speak about that a little bit. I want to hear about that.
Okay, like just what that means to you?
What does it mean to you, like as somebody who's doing and supporting this change work? Like, what does it mean to inspire that readiness?
Yeah.
How do you know when that's happened as well? Yeah.
Good questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one, how do you inspire it? First, for me, I think it's so important that we get that everyone really wants this. This is not like warm, fuzzy, positive affirmation stuff. People want to live a purposeful life. They want to live a meaningful life. They want to do what is meaningful to them. And along the way, they've just learned, and probably for good reason, that it doesn't matter. I don't matter. My actions and my investments don't matter. What I choose to do, it's not worth it. And so then they give up, or they're apathetic, or they start to self-harm, or whatever the funny things we do. Addiction, like it's all over the place.
Resignation came up.
Totally.
Like, oh, I wanted these things, but like I can't really have. Like I've tried and it didn't work, and blah blah. Yeah, you see that a lot of the time with people in addiction.
Of course. And so what I have seen in all of, like, working with thousands and thousands of people is underlying all of that conditioning and all of that self-doubt and all of that self-loathing and all of the funny human things we say and do to ourselves, that there is a kind of purity of heart and a desire, just like that baby or that young child has. We still have that part of us that knows the opportunity of life, that it's precious, that it's sacred, that it's special, that we can do something special with it. And so my job is not to try to take something I have and put it in you. It's that I know it's there already, and I know there's some things that have kind of like been built over top of it. And my job is to first be in touch with that part of me, because then I'm resonating with it. It's like, it's what's going on in me. It's what sort of flavors and fills what I speak. So that's like the intrinsic, innate way that we inspire others.
Yeah.
And then there's like the archaeology of it is like, if you're working with someone over a period of time, how do we start to move these big pieces out of the way? And when they arise, how do we give them a context where they can really be seen and felt and expressed, so that they can soften and relax? And when those pieces do, the things that appear to be covering over, like the purity of heart and love of life, that's really there. When we give those pieces that are covering that a chance to just be seen and felt and heard, they naturally relax and fall away, because in a way they required something false to stay together. It's like those limiting beliefs, those limiting pieces required an investment that wasn't really real. We had to believe in something false for those things to come together and hold. And so as we start to engage with them and the aspects of life that kind of touch them or trigger them, those pieces soften. And then what happens is we just naturally begin to rest into a more essential aspect of what we are. And that's where that readiness comes from. It's like we come back into full relationship with why we're here. And that why starts to fill everything. It starts to feed everything. It starts to fuel everything. And then what used to feel worthless or not worth it or impossible changes. It all, on the surface, it's all the same. It's the same circumstances. You're the same person, but you are relating to something different and you have a different perspective. Now with that, it's like things can start to really change in a way that's not just, I have this analogy about when stuff is really challenging and sort of misaligned in our life. It's like we have a house and the foundation is messed up and we run around painting the walls and changing the furniture.
Right.
It's like, that's nice. And it might look a little better for a while, but you didn't get to where the real issue is.
Yeah.
And so when we really get why we're here, we naturally start to live a life where those deeper pieces have room to come up and we get to fix or transform the real foundation of our lives. Yeah. Then potential becomes this, you didn't even know what you could do before all that shift happens.
Yeah, there's this anchoring in sort of the old energies or the more constricted energies that is a falsehood that isn't really real, that causes us to imagine life differently than what it truly is, which is a much more expansive, if we consider human beings, if we consider animals, and animals wander through life and find all the things that they need in order to survive. Maybe there's some struggle, maybe there's a cold winter, maybe there's whatever, but like they have everything they need to move through that journey. And like we are also in some ways animals. We also have that, and it's just like culture and school and all of these different things that sort of like layer on top. It was like I can't see that I have that same capacity to move into life and to have all of those things provided and to be in that way. And there's all these layers of for a lot of people, like pain and trauma, big T trauma, little T trauma, whatever, that cause them to not be able to see that fullness. And when that work, that unfolding work happens, when you're speaking about that, it reminded me of when I, with my will, decided I was no longer eating dairy or wheat. And it was like, okay, so I did the change work to release that, but it was like, okay, but underneath that is like emotional eating, right? It was the specific things, not so much, but then like the underlying issue of like emotional, okay, I'm going to do work on emotional. It's like, no, like the underlying issue is a lack of connection to that understanding that we are that part of that bigger system, and that everything we need is available there.
Yeah. Someone said to me one time, someone was speaking with them about a weight issue. So they were really having trouble keeping their weight in what they felt like was a healthy range.
Yeah.
And the person said something that I think would be potentially inflammatory, to a lot of people in the health field or the personal growth field. Oh, I'll offend all sorts of people.
Great.
So he said, you don't have a weight issue. You have an orientation issue. And so what he meant was, the problem is not the food. The problem is your relationship with the food, your relationship with what the food does for you. So if we eat in a way that is about coping, then we will use food in a way that's dysfunctional. It's fundamentally about separating from the present moment, separating from what we're feeling, which is really a natural, innate expression of some unmet need or something that really is asking for our attention and our love. And instead of tending to it, instead of creating space for that and really facilitating its integration, we reach for a donut or a milkshake or a whatever. And so the weight issue is symptomatic of something that's much simpler, much more accessible,
so much simpler,
and really painful to address, because we've been using whatever that is. For some people it's food, for some people it's sex, for some people it's wealth and money and control and power, and it doesn't matter what it is. If we're not okay with the uncomfortable aspects of what we feel as human beings, we will reach for whatever is available to us, and that will become our addiction. And
this
so
this one, lots of people reach for this one.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the devices. So in a way, to address addiction, of course, there's things on the surface you can do to take care of symptoms and integrate some of that surface stuff. But on a fundamental level, to really address addiction in a way where you're not like ever a recovering addict, where you actually really
you're just actually recovered.
And then it's not even that you don't ever have cravings again. It's like you're so grounded in why you're here and what life is about, that when difficult feelings come up that you might maybe kind of categorize as a craving or an addictive kind of remnant of your addiction, it doesn't hook you at all. You're just completely willing to feel it. And so you're not addicted anymore. You're fundamentally not addicted because your orientation has shifted. You no longer create a conditional relationship with uncomfortable feelings. And then you're free. Not free of difficult feelings. You're free of the seeming kind of giving over of your power to some external solution.
To figure out how to fix that, to
figure
mitigate,
out insulate.
And I feel like that's, from some of the reading I've done about early human development, a lot of that's a failed bond with mother a lot of the time. And then like on top of that, like a failed bond with nature and community. So there's this, here's a whatever, here's a soother, here's a bottle, here's a snack, here's a thing. And so it's patterned into people from a really young age. Yeah.
I mean, I listened to a episode of CBC a while ago, and they were talking about meaning. And I think when people hear the word meaning, often it's like the meaning of, right? Like the definition. And that's one way to describe meaning. But the meaning that they focused on was more like implicit meaning, embedded, innate meaning. Is there such a thing as meaning that's there, free of any intellectual knowledge or understanding of it? And so they were talking about how as adults, we understand the meaning of things, but as children, we relate directly to meaning, what things really are, because we don't have so much construct. We haven't created so much complexity in our understanding and relating and categorization of the world. And that it changes us. It changes how we relate, and that there's something about being, fully like beginner's mind, child mind, in relation to life as an adult that is powerful. It doesn't mean we're naive. It means we're not projecting something. It's like projecting something two-dimensional on an incredibly complex three-dimensional world. Why would we do that? There's so much more there than the two-dimensional label.
Yeah.
And so, we can look at that in terms of how we engage with what our feelings are saying, like what's happening in this moment. Okay, I can say I feel sad, and that's good, but there's more there. And it's not like sadness is in this little box and here's sadness. We can feel sadness and happiness simultaneously.
Certainly.
We can feel anger and joy simultaneously. So it's way more interesting and nuanced and beautiful than the categories. But that involves the relinquishing of what feels like control. It feels like I know what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's like from the developmental perspective that you're talking about. If I'm not surrounded with people who are grounded and secure, what that tells me is this environment that we are in, that I was born into, isn't safe. And so the implicit, the deeper meaning, not intellectual, but the deeper meaning that then gets taken on by that child and then ultimately the adult is the world is an insecure place. And I'm an insecure person in an insecure place. And you can't intellectually solve that puzzle. That has to be implicitly sorted out through, embodying presence and a willingness to feel and navigate all the difficulties that arise from what insecurity is.
Yeah, and then like often could be accelerated. That journey can be accelerated by like transformational change work that's anchored and rooted in the body as opposed to in the mind, right? Like so it's more somatic work where like the first thing that popped to mind is like just having somebody like lie on you or lying on somebody and being like, we're not going anywhere. This is just a place. And that even that like oxytocin piece is something that so many people were missing when they were young. That's why cuddle puddles are so great. That's why, it's like, oh, this is a safe, like, oh, like 40 minutes later, you're like, I'm still in a safe place. Wow, this is great. Like, and it helps to rebuild that sense of this is a safe, like it's a secure relationship with myself, a secure relationship with the people around me, and therefore like the greater world must be relatively safe.
Yeah, and by engaging in external environments or situations where it's different than maybe any of the dysfunctional stuff we grew up with, that gives us these external cues that, oh, maybe the beliefs I have are not true. And that's powerful, but it's still limited. If we're, because what can easily happen is we can create a relationship with the solution is out there. When I go to the cuddle puddle, when I go to my therapist, when someone touches my arm, when I have my feet in the grass, all of that stuff can be really powerfully supportive and healing for us. Yeah. And if we have a relationship with any of that stuff that says the solution is out there, we've missed the mark.
Still missing the point,
right?
Certainly.
Because this system is built to integrate. Its most natural way of moving in life is to integrate what hasn't been dealt with and to deal with, navigate, be resilient in relationship to what does show up in life.
That's how we're born. That's how we're created.
We're the most complex example of that.
Yeah.
And so to start there, like I already have what I need. And then I can intelligently engage with life and use the things that also help that. But I know where it starts. That to me, if I'm working with anyone, that to me is something I want to really instill is I'm not going to fix you. No one is going to fix you. You are made for all of that to get sorted out. And then there's things and people and environments and activities that might facilitate that more than others. And that's worth understanding. But don't get lost there. Because again, we'll externalize the solution in a way that's ultimately limiting to our potential.
Certainly. Yeah. Wow. Thank you. We've got a question here from Amy. So she says, this is from the addiction piece. It says, such a wonderful way to view addiction. But now the question is, how do you change your orientation and truly heal? I think we touched on that a little bit, but maybe you can, maybe I can dive into that a little bit.
Dive in and invite me.
So how do we truly heal from that? I think a huge part of that is that orientation towards self. And both of us have brought our hands to our heart when we're speaking about that. I know that I've gone through a massive journey in my life from like a place of really living every day in a place of self-loathing, self-hatred. I remember the day self-loathing lifted and I was like, oh my God, I woke up and it wasn't there. Like, what? Please don't come back, right? Like as a visceral sensation. And the addiction, the addictive patterns, because I've been in that myself as well, just like over the years, like falling away. And there are certain things that have been really supportive of that, but also really want to honor that, like what you said, of we have this capacity to do that. We have the capacity to heal these things. And in fact, our life is putting things in front of us constantly that encourage us to move through that. If people are like, I'm in the same pattern again, I thought I healed this already. And it's like, that needs work, right? That frustration. Okay, so we've got frustration in the system that needs to be resolved. We've got frustration, we've got anger, we've got all of these emotions. And I think a huge part of it is allowing those emotions to be, finding a safe space, whether that's something we create ourselves. For me, for a long time, it was my car. Then it became this room, right? It's like, this is the altar space. This is the workspace where I do like my inner work as well as the outer work. And it's this process of allowing those emotions to have space, continuing to anchor into presence and into love and into self-love and into love of others. Because once we move through those patterns predominantly within ourselves, then we start seeing them in other people. And if we're still angry at them for doing those things, and it's like, oh, okay, there's work to be done there. And I see it as sort of this ripple effect. And then the people who are called to do change work on behalf of, or like in support of others, that's sort of like the next phase of that, of like, I've come to a place of resolution within myself. And you see a lot of people who haven't necessarily come to that. They know that that's where they're going, but there's still a lot of like that heal thyself piece. There's a lot of like inner wounding within the healing community. Oh my gosh, let me just say a prayer for them right now, please. Like, there's so much that needs to be done there, and in the world in general.
Yeah, and I see it as it is our natural trajectory. When we integrate and become whole, embodied in that integration, it's not random. It's not a surprise that we then naturally just make ourselves available. First to the people in our immediate circle, but usually then to our broader community, and because of the world and society, to the global community. I think that's woven into us. And we can also move through those stages prematurely because of our own unwillingness to just be with what's there for us.
Yep.
And that's a subtle discernment. But in terms of the real question around how do you change your orientation, I look at it this way, and this is, I want to be as concise and practical as possible, even though we're getting into areas that are they're not often talked about, and so people don't always easily relate to them. So when I think of our orientation, it's not our thinking, it's not our feeling, it's not our conditioning. Our orientation is something different. Our orientation is, from where are we really coming from in the living of life? And none of that is dependent on this particular human body I have, this particular nervous system and its thoughts and beliefs. That orientation is more about how authentically and openly and receptively am I with life. When that shifts, when I have a full yes to life, as is,
regardless of whether or not it's easy,
without it needing to change at all. It means I meet bliss with the same kind of presence and availability that I meet pain and sorrow and grief. You can already see, if you kind of feel into what that would be like, you move in life in a way that's way more free. You don't reach for immediate, like short-term solutions to deep problems, because first you're just with it all. And none of it's really a problem, even though it can be really hard. And
it just is.
It just is.
It's just there. It's just like, I ran into somebody today with my car. It is.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, woe is me, I'm bad, this is terrible. None of that. Just like, oh, okay.
And so in essence, to shift, we have to value presence and authenticity and what's real more than our story or our preferred experience.
Yeah.
That's, if you wanted to sort of
or the
boil
need to
it
make
down.
meaning.
Yeah, but even that is like, our whole need to make meaning is usually oriented to when we do, we feel more secure or more clear.
Certainly.
So it's like when I am actually willing for the feelings that arise to do whatever they need to do, but my real attention, my real focus, my real inclination is towards openness and presence and authenticity. Now my orientation naturally, again, honest orientation is already there. It's like waiting for us. We don't have to create it. It's not fabricated or built. It's real. And so what's required is for us to let go of our hold on everything of conditioning and behavior that helped us manage life. That's to me the easiest way to describe orientation. So then it's a shift of kind of a quality of presence versus a shift of like changing something in our thoughts or our feelings.
Yeah, and I think a huge part of that is orientation towards action versus being. So there's a, like in the addictive pattern, there's often this reaching for, this grabbing for, this searching for, that comes from a discomfort in the body more often than not, or a discomfort in the thoughts. I'm thinking this, I can't handle it, I need X. I'm feeling this, I can't handle it, I need whatever. And so there's this orientation towards the external for the solution. There's this orientation towards something versus just being with it, just like, oh, okay. And and then that also that orientation is like the external world versus presence versus like the witnessing consciousness versus our understanding of true reality to whatever capacity we have to feel and understand that in our bodies and our nervous systems. And when that orientation happens, it's not about the heart then. The heart is just a symbol of the place where we're capable of feeling that potentially most strongly in our bodies, right? Which is why we point to it and we're like, this is where it comes from. You look at like heart math work as well. There's a large body of science around coherence and how like a loving, warm, heartful place will bring us back to a good place or a pleasant place, let's call it. Yeah. And there's so much in terms of learning to be in that presence. And at the same time, it's so simple.
And that's another piece that I think we get sidetracked on is there's no work to do around that first shift of orientation.
There's none. It's just, it's there.
It's there.
Innate,
if you're willing to open and rest into it, it is just, it's you.
Yeah.
And then there's what it means to live life from that place.
Totally different.
That's where all of the work exists.
Yeah.
And if we're not clear, we'll turn, because this is what we do. We turn what is most easy, essential, and immediate into a process. And we want the process to be easy and immediate. Right? So we flip them, and it's easy to flip them back, but it's not painless to flip them back. Right? Then we have to face anything we've been avoiding.
Yeah.
And that's why if we look around the world, there's so much mental illness and so much addiction and so much dysfunctional coping, because that shift doesn't make sense to us. We can't balance the equation of shifting back to an honest orientation.
Right.
And
because all of life has been set up to a certain degree to program us otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much example
of
doing it the other way.
Yeah.
And again, we're not unaware that when we get more honest, we're more vulnerable. Period. Full stop.
Yeah.
Honesty is vulnerability. And so if we're not really valuing what's real more than how we feel, that equation cannot be balanced. And that shift is easy, but then there's the implications. Yeah.
Still trying to wrap my head around that, if real more than what we feel, and like balancing, like valuing that more, valuing what's real more than the individual feelings. Yeah. I'm gonna sit with that one later.
Yeah.
I can feel it. I'm like, I can hear what you're saying, but it's not quite ready to like permeate my entire being. It's like, okay. Yeah. Thank you for that.
We've been sitting with that one for generations.
Yeah.
Eons,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's exciting because we are also in this time where there's like more and more people who are sitting with that in the context of daily life, in the context of like living sort of a householder's life versus a more monastic life, right? And in the past, that pondering was more available to people who had completely extricated themselves. I'm talking like over the course of history, although I know people, I think, I have no idea what people over history have spoken about or thought about really.
You have a sense of it.
But there's a sense of that all, like, as part of being a human being is that ponderance of that question of like, why am I here? What is the real purpose? What is life? Those questions and the not knowing of it. And it's really beautiful to be in a time where there are more and more people asking about that, where where you and I can sit down and be like, this is a conversation, and it's a conversation that not only we want to have, but that we want to know, like, that other people are able to be a part of and understand that a little bit more through the understanding that we're sharing here today. Yeah. More real than the feelings. It's still like
don't rush it.
Oh my gosh. If I could go back and tell myself anything from this whole like awakening journey, it would be like, don't rush it. It would be like, it's a process. Yeah, as opposed to looking for that instant gratification, that like instant fix. And there's an interesting piece that came up too, which was when I had that first joygasm experience, it was just a word I gave to describe that, like, the reality of what we are, right? And we call it a direct experience if you go through an enlightenment intensive type process. The most horrifying part of that experience was afterwards, was seeing how much of myself was unwilling to be in relation with that completely. Like, it was just like, I know I can touch all of existence. Please keep it away from me. Like, please, no, please. Like, and there was so much pain that had built up that needed to slowly over years be like loved and brought into wholeness. And a lot of that, I feel like, is a lack of really coherent guidance. But also just like that it takes time and it's a process.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point where what happens, and this is hard to reconcile, but when we have difficulty and pain and trauma in life, that gets woven into our sense of being. And so then it's not just about letting go of the pain or letting go of the trauma or healing. It's about allowing who we seem to be to ourselves to dissolve, because that's what an awakening experience does. Is it touches what's real. It delivers an experience where we are in direct relationship with what's real. And there's also the clear understanding that if we let the wave of that move through us consistently and unobstructed, it's the end of us as we've known ourselves. It is the end. And so that's a piece that we have to orient towards what's real for that wave to come through. Otherwise, when that wave approaches something we have hold of and we're like, mine, whatever
my identity, myself, I am.
Even my pain, even my trauma, even my victimhood.
Yeah, my attachment to seeing myself as a victim,
to that
all of those things.
Endlessly, unless we're willing to feel and be with and relate to what's real, in spite of the consequences. And so that's, there's all of these modalities and techniques and things that you can do. And if you don't get that first one, like, forget it.
That willingness to let go of the identity.
Because that will really do it. Then the living of your life does it all. And then it's cool to do EMDR or, tap therapy or, go to a therapist or do, somatic stuff or go to workshops or retreat. Like, all of it's not a problem. Pharmaceuticals even. I see there's a place for that kind of chemical intervention. Not in the way that we use it, but I'm not sweeping it off the table.
Yeah.
It's just that if we don't get that first piece, it's all Band-Aids for something that's actually way, way deeper than the skin. And so we just have to, like, let's be honest with ourselves. And then the research is now coming through. We know that. We know this stuff. Are we willing to actually change how we live? There's an internet meme that's like, what is it, like, who wants change? Yeah, who wants to change? Everyone's silent. Everyone wants it to be different, but when
Yeah.
When the rubber hits the road, people get quiet.
Yeah.
And so until that changes, human society will continue to kind of have this polarity and fabricated conflict, fabricated dysfunction. That isn't really real, but we've made it alive.
Yeah, I had I had a Jehovah's Witness woman come to the front door this morning, and I had a great chat with her. It was hilarious. So good.
Okay.
We talked about Christ consciousness. We talked about upaya and capacity for people to understand the teachings at various levels. And we had this beautiful moment where it was like, oh, we're on kind of the same mission. I was like, I honor door-to-door ministry. That's challenging. Good on you, you know? Like,
totally.
And it was a moment of, you could be like, and no. It's just like, oh, this is life. This is what's happening. Let's have this conversation for a period of time. Let's see what's happening. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, I watched a movie last night called About Time, and I totally recommend it. It's really, really sweet. It is about time travel, but it's not sci-fi. So if you're not into sci-fi, you can check it out and enjoy it. It's very character-driven, and what it really is saying is when we show up to life and this is it, in spite of having a sense that it's always been there and that it will always be there, because that's our lived sense. Our only sense is the lived sense, and that sense has only been here when we've been here. So, but when this is it, it's different. The preciousness of life, the opportunity of life, and in particular the opportunity of human interaction and connection, glows to us when we're really in touch with what we're really here for. And so it's one of those things where you could even have a feeling in your chest like, door-to-door person, like, I don't want to talk to you. And then you could, in that moment, feel that fully, not need to do anything with it, and go and ask yourself like a different question. Because of your openness, there's like a little space where a different question can get asked, which is, what's the best way I could spend interacting with this person? That's a cool question. Grocery store, your 50-year anniversary with your partner, like, it doesn't matter. We have these interactions and we get to choose, what am I going to do with this, this moment, this opportunity? I think that if we started asking that question more often, things would transform quite quickly. And what's possible there for me in that moment, I open the door, I see a Bible, and I'm like, oh God, that's my knee-jerk reaction. It's just like, oh, here we go, right? And then I'm like, oh, there's a human attached to that. She's probably lovely. She looks like my grandma, right? Maybe not quite as old as my grandma, but like, she's like, okay, there's a woman here as well as a Bible. And there's that opportunity. And then for me, the opportunity is like, how can I bring more love to the space? How can I, my judgment is that she's closed-minded and has one way of looking at the world. And wants to force something.
And wants to force it on me. Right? And so I turn around and it's like, okay, well, I also do that. Right? Yeah. I move into that moment being like, I could move into it being like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're full of like, don't realize how old that book is, blah, 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 blah. Is that kind? Is that loving? Is that how I want to show up in the world? No. So it's like, how can I be myself in that space, share some of what I think, acknowledge where she's at, touch the parts that are similar, speak about how I appreciate Christianity for things that it's brought, and Christ consciousness. See the look on her face when she's like, when I say, we are Christ consciousness awakening and in that place, and then ask her directly, like, are you Christ consciousness here at my door? And she sort of like has to think about that a little bit. And it's like, okay, great. Like, if I can just crack her mind open to what Christianity can be in the world a little bit differently, like, that's great for me in that moment. And at the same time, it's just like, oh, this is a conversation. We're in conversation, and it's great. So it's one of those moments where like a split judgment can be an opportunity for her to expand, for me to expand, and for all of life to expand in that way too.
Yeah. And that's, in a way, that's the shift of orientation I'm talking about. That's where this guy, no worries. There's I think he's a child psychiatrist initially, but he's really into mindfulness and healing of trauma, and he's articulate. If you haven't heard of Dan Siegel, check him out. But he describes it as the plane of possibility. And there's, in psychology, there's this saying, everything psychological is biological. So we can go into the nervous system and measure the brain waves and the patterns and the electrical signals. And when something happens there in a particular area, the person has a psychological experience. And so there's so much about the brain we don't know, but we can there's still a logic model that's starting to develop out
between
of it.
them, yeah.
And so that's a very kind of deterministic, mechanistic way of looking at the human condition, right? It's like the brain does the thing and then the experience happens. Okay, That's true. But somehow there's something about mindfulness and meditation, and I have a theory that it's not any of those forms necessarily, but there's something about what those empower or enliven or activate in us.
Maybe just being.
Right. and so then if we come into an open, full relationship with the present moment, something changes about our biology. Like our biology changes, and of course then our psychology changes. And so he's talking about that as, and I like when he uses the word plane, because it's almost like, it's offset. It's not this reality. It's, if you thought about this being a two-dimensional world, it's this third-dimensional plane that is immediately expansive and available to us and isn't limited by the first two planes. So the plane of possibility is this shift of orientation I'm talking about. And what it essentially does is it puts us into a perspective and a position that isn't limited by our experience. And so now we can see more. And what used to feel like a one-track, no options pathway shifts and becomes multiple choices. So like choices open up. Doesn't mean we can easily choose those choices or painlessly choose those choices, but instead of addiction grabbing us and it feeling like it's doing it to us or life is doing it to us, we start to see our choices from that shift of orientation. And to me, that's like the root of our real power, is not the things we do on the surface. It's this more fundamental choice of orientation that then essentially is about how much of my potential am I opening to and allowing to move in my life. That's kind of the equation. And the more open I am, the more of that potential becomes available and the more choices that open up to me. And then life again becomes rich and deep and expansive. And it's not a get out of jail free card for any of the difficult stuff. You just now have perspective in it.
The orientation piece, I had this visual of like being caught in a riptide by the shore, and a lot of people living in that place of like swimming like with everything they've got towards the shore, being dragged completely backwards.
Sure.
And it's like, what do you do in that situation? In a real life situation, you stop, you let it flow, you let it take you, you flow, you go sideways to the way that the painful experience is, and you just like be in whatever it is there. That's part of how you get out of that situation. Yeah, as a metaphor for that process. Yeah,
that's a good one.
Wow, super good.
So yeah, I feel like, I don't know, how are we doing with time?
We're at 47, so it's like,
so I'm just curious. I feel like we've been talking about stuff that I love and bigger, broader, more kind of philosophical stuff. I'm just wondering if there's anything more practical or specific that you're curious about or that you'd want to talk about for the last little bit. And then I'll obviously invite anyone that's watching to ask questions if they want.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to hear a story of like somebody you worked with that's like that you would consider like pushes the boundary of that like human potential, like what's possible. Somebody who you've supported or you've seen in that like journey of going from a place of sort of, okay, like I'm doing well in my life to like, holy crap, like a story of somebody who's gone through that journey.
I mean, one that comes up, this is super like worldly and practical.
That's great. We just said we were going to do that.
So a few years ago, I was working with Volleyball Canada and I was coaching beach volleyball with the national team in Toronto.
Okay.
And so I was working with, there's three main groups that we're working with the practice center, younger kind of provincial team and sort of youth athletes, carded national team athletes. And then there was this middle group. So they're kind of 18 to 24, talented, might be junior carded or not carded yet, but they're on this trajectory. And if they kind of work hard, there's this opportunity for them to become kind of some of the top teams in the country and travel internationally, go to the Olympics, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one kid in particular, undersized. I think he was about 6'1", and which for beach volleyball is quite short.
Okay.
And so we worked together, and he was one of those. He was always in the gym. I think he worked his upper body more than was optimal, but like that was sort of
That's his choice, yeah.
But he worked so hard, and then you hear these stories about athletes that make it to the highest level and how kind of fixated they are. And in a certain way, you have to be obsessive about your training and about your trajectory. And so he was that way. But at the time, he was kind of in competing in that middle group as like one of the better athletes, but he wasn't a standout. And I remember one practice, we were working on passing, and so I'm throwing balls at him, different locations, and it became clear that high on his left shoulder was like a weak area for him. Like he struggled most there with the passing.
Yeah.
And so we talked about it, and he said, I'm going to go home and get my mom to throw 1,000 balls at my left shoulder. It's like this was the kind
That's
of
how he responded to that challenge. He's
not like, oh shit, like how do I hide that weakness, or how do I? He's like went right into it, right at it.
Yeah.
And so now he's one of the top 2 teams in the country. He travels internationally. He's probably going to the 2020 Olympics.
Wow.
And so that's, I played a small part in his trajectory, but that season that we worked together, I really appreciated what it looks like to see someone before they make it, but you can see the makings of excellence, of mastery, because of their approach.
Yeah.
And I think, sport is an interesting environment to look at and explore, because it's so pressurized and there's so much ego. Like mostly sport is full of this kind of like me, mine, I'm going to do it, put the medal around my neck. Right.
Yeah.
And it's clear to me that sport isn't really about any of that stuff. When you have a flow experience in sport, what you're in is like that awakening experience you had, where you're in touch with what's really there and what's really possible. And in a way, sport is just one particular arena where we get to chase that. But again, if we make it about the outcome, we mostly take ourselves out of the opportunity to be in flow, because we'll trade surrender, which is really where flow comes from, for control. And so, like that example I use, I wanted to be really practical about it. And I also think it's really important that when we look at worldly endeavors, awesome, we live in a world. There's things happening. There's things to do. There's a career to follow through on. There's, all sorts of responsibilities and things we can engage with. And for me, the real point is for us to stay connected to the deeper why of it all. And then really play hard, like go for it. Do the thing as best you give your whole heart to it. But don't spend your whole life trying to get something from it that you think will then make everything okay, which is kind of partly when we go wrong.
You see people going towards business career success being like, this will save me, this will like do something great.
Once I have this much, achieve, right?
then I'll feel okay. You see
people
who just really have a lot and aren't necessarily happy in it.
If the mode you use to get there isn't full of what you want to have when you get there,
good luck.
You won't have what you want when you get there.
Yeah.
Like that's just how life works.
Yeah. Yeah. I came across this concept of like shifting addiction from like negative behaviors to more positive behaviors. So looking at people who are successful as being like quite highly addictive types, who often do have or have had drug and addiction problems, and shifting that from a place of sort of like painful addiction to successful addiction, let's call it. And I'm wondering what you feel about that. We sort of just touched on that, but like let's expand that a little bit more versus like being of service because you're in a flow state and in an expansive place.
Yeah.
I
mean, what first comes to me is that I think we make the mistake of thinking that if I'm not results oriented, if I'm not outcome oriented, I'll just lay around like a slug all day. I think a lot of people believe that, and a lot of people subscribe to that belief. And it's just not true. It's not that there aren't lazy, lethargic, apathetic people in the world. For sure there are. But when we come into relationship with with what's real in life, and we're really in our heart, and we're giving room for what's most precious to us to be expressed through this vehicle, it's not apathy that comes. It's not lethargy. So first I want to say, it's like you can be totally on fire with something and it can be real and coming from a healthy place. And discernment is needed because they can look exactly the same. Fixation and obsession can look like complete, utter givenness to passion. And I think it's actually really important we know the difference.
Is the feeling sensation in the body, or
I think it can show up differently in the feelings, but to me it precedes that. It's like, what is this for? Is this an expression, a giving of what I'm clear to give because it's just right to stretch in this way, to invest, to build in this way because it fulfills me, not on a surface level, not I feel good today because I did X. It's like I am giving my life to something. You talked at the beginning about this feeling about what it feels like to be a part of something more. It's like connected to something more deeper, more meaningful. When that's our why, then whatever we give that has that intensity to it is all goodness. And and one of the ways we can see it more clearly is if something more real for us were to arise, we would lay down what we've been investing in and go there. If we wouldn't lay it down,
right,
because something more real, more valuable, more meaningful came up, now we're in the realm of addiction. Now we're in the realm of fixation because we've identified with it.
This
and
is
we
it.
won't,
This is what
we
we're doing.
won't
Yeah.
let it go.
Yeah.
In spite of seeing a truer way to be or a truer path to walk.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, a good reference people can use. Yeah.
Thanks. That helps parts of me. Yeah. There's this willingness to shift, this willingness to just continue to follow that connection to that highest place. Yeah. Which is often really judged. It's often like, especially in sort of the new age hippie community, there's this like with the flow that's there, but not necessarily, there's a level of disrespect that sort of comes towards it sometimes, of not sticking with things, not sticking with like, I started this and now I'm excited over here. Gosh, I know I've judged myself for that one a bunch.
And it's all, it can all be right and wrong. So we can, I remember this analogy. I remember this because it's about the orientation. I remember this analogy that someone gave me and it so resonated with me and I had to really look at myself. They talked about the value of completing what we start. So one of the skills is to really be clear that you're ready to complete something you start. And if you're not, then what you end up doing is, like the analogy was, you build bridges. So you see there's some value in a bridge from here to there. And you get excited and you start to build a bridge and then something's like, oh, but that's interesting. And then you leave that bridge half built and then you start another bridge. And then halfway through, oh, no, that. And then you go to, and then at the end of your life, you build 50 half bridges that are essentially useless. You didn't complete it. You didn't do what it was built to do. And not only does that leave manifestation in the world of incomplete, but
yourself, like oh, I never finished that.
Right?
I never.
And so there's real value in follow through and completion. And again, we have to learn to master the difference between being kind of floaty and frivolous and non-committal with recognizing we're on the wrong path and that it's time to shift, and just doing that in spite of the loss involved or in spite of the disruption involved. And they can look very similar on the surface. And where is the shift coming from? If it's not about it's better, it makes me feel better, that's a good sign. You know, if it's hard to make that change.
Yeah, because we're aiming for something higher, right? It's like
we naturally do.
Yeah. It's
that trajectory is what naturally happens when we're living for what's meaningful to us.
Yeah, and that search for, not that search, but like that, one of the ways that I've looked at how do I start projects, how do I choose what's a good project, is like, what are all the challenges that are probably going to come up? Who am I going to have to grow to be that person? And am I willing to show up and do that growth? Because that's where I know for me, that's where I'm going to get stopped. That's where in the past I would have been like, bye project, like, see ya, next thing.
Yeah.
Or in that place of transition or freezing. just like keeping it on hold? Am I willing to become that person? And a lot of what I've come to realize is that that's the journey. It's not about the particular project. It's about how I'm able to stay in relation with myself in that sense of flow and let go of and clear through those more challenging pieces that come up in the process of shooting for something high.
Yes.
Right? It's like we've got this big vision. We talk about, like our community living off grid in the woods all together. Like that's a big ass vision, and it requires a lot of cooperative parts, and it requires a lot of people to stand fully in their true path, and it requires a lot of like working through whatever's in the way. And I think that's part of why it hasn't necessarily happened as fully as people imagine it might happen, is because, well, in order to move from here to an eco village that's fully set up and fully functioning, I have to let go of my identity of being here in the city. I have to let go of all of these different pieces. And so it's like, am I willing to let go of that personal connection to who I know myself as, in order to be the kind of person who actually succeeds in this project, in this endeavor, and moving towards this mission? And it's terrifying. It's terrifying. I mean, in any endeavor that I've gone into where I've stretched myself, it's like, I'm going to have to die during this process. I'm going to have to, and that's why rituals of death are so important, because that's like, I'm going to give my conscious mind a little place to like grab onto while we're in this process of shifting over to becoming somebody new. And then hopefully along the way, everything lets go too.
Yeah, I think the ritual helps in a way where, because our society on a certain level is very immature, we don't have embedded in our day-to-day practices, in our kind of communities, so to speak, these rites of passage, these transformations that are innate to the human condition. And so I think the ceremonies in their best iteration are opportunities to give form and edges and texture to what naturally occurs in life, but that we are kind of insulated, experientially insulated from, because they just weren't a part of what we grew up with.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I think we're so responsive to them. And when we're really fully in life, what ceremony represents naturally occurs. Right? So again, it's this piece about, you kind of got it from out there, that thing that happened kind of touched you into something, and that's all helpful because it's embedded.
All of a sudden, washing the dishes is your ceremony.
Can be.
You're like, wow. Yeah. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's been so good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the talk. I love what you're doing with Facebook Live and just your piece around kind of bringing people in.
Yeah.
I would love to kind of stay in touch and come back for another chat.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
we'd love to have you back
sweet.
later. And if people want to get a hold of you, if they want to come do change work with you in person, you've got a whole string. You're on sort of, this is like your first takeoff point from a longer summer tour. So give us a couple of dates and places, and I'll link to them later.
Yeah.
People can find you there. Yeah.
So in terms of this road trip, as I left Edmonton, I'm in Calgary for a night, and then I'll be in Caroline with the Embrace Intimacy Festival. It's happening there. It's all about our relationship with intimacy, not just interpersonally, sort of this space inside with others, with society and our life. So I'll be doing a couple workshops there, and looking forward to enjoying the weekend. Then I'll be in Vancouver for the Beautiful House of Business event at the Chan Center, which is a really neat, unique event put on by Tina Overby. And it's all about just sort of like a more creative, more what happens with business when we come to it brand new. It's called Business in the Dark. And so I'll be sharing a piece on deep listening there. Then I'll be on Salt Spring for a Contact Festival, and that's more just
that looked amazing.
Play.
Contact dance.
I could talk a lot about that. Maybe next time we can get into contact dance and what it means to me. And then I'll be at the Heart of Tantra Festival in Squamish, doing some more communication work. And my website, evolvenowinc.com, is where people can kind of reach out, read a bit more about me and my work, and kind of join the list or kind of message me if they want to work directly. I'm back from a trip to Asia and haven't really started working again yet. This summer was a chance to kind of recharge and re-clarify. And in the fall, I'll be doing a lot more offerings and getting back into coaching privately. Great. So if people are interested in that, they can reach me here on Facebook. I'm easy to find, or through my website.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. And I'd love to have you back in the fall once you got a little more clarity around what exactly that next phase looks like, and honor you also in taking, time to figure out what that looks like and what's next for you.
Yeah.
That's really exciting.
Perfect.
Oh, it's been super good. Thank you.
Yeah. Good to see you.
Super wonderful. I want to say thank you to everybody who tunes in here and who's tuning in later on the replay. Super appreciate you guys. Love to be of service in this way, sharing the voices. I love featuring conscious men because I often meet people who are like, there's no conscious men out there. I'm like, no, they're here. They're great. It's wonderful. There's more and more. So that's really wonderful. And yeah, always just grateful for getting to be a part of your guys' world and opening these doorways. So I'd like to end with a couple of ohms. You want to do 3 with me?
Yeah, sure.
We'll close it up. And you guys are welcome to join in. Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Have a wonderful day.